3 minutes. That's all it took to end the bloodiest war in the galaxy's history. 3 minutes. One human and a cup of coffee. The headline, which would later shake the 17 interconnected galaxies, read, "Human ends 47-year war with common sense." But no one could have foreseen what would happen when Ambassador Bextara brought a human as a bodyguard to the peace negotiations. It all started as the worst day in Bextara's 347-year diplomatic career. The emergency alert jolted her out of hibernation at 3 a.m. Galactic Standard Time. The message was clear. Weapons broken. Planets authorized. Last attempt at peace. Report immediately. When she arrived, the Galactic Council chamber was in chaos. 17 species shouting at each other, waving tentacles, claws, and appendages impossible to classify. The war between the Tefrians and the Crystalline had dragged on for 47 years, leaving billions dead and dozens of star systems in ruins, and now they were poised to escalate to weapons of planetary destruction. Ambassador Bextara, Council Chairman Blocknath snorted, his breathing apparatus making him sound like a deflating balloon. "We have a situation." Bextara's 4 eyes rolled in unison. "Let me guess. Peace talks have collapsed again. The Cephrians want to keep the stolen mining rights. The Crystalline want reparations for nearly half a century of war. And somehow it falls to me to fix it. Actually," Blocknath continued, "it's worse than that. They've both agreed to one last negotiation, 72 hours. If we don't achieve peace by then, they'll use planet-shattering weapons." The chamber fell silent. Planet-shattering weapons hadn't been used for over 1,000 years. The last time someone activated one, it created a tourist attraction that's still dangerous to visit today. "So naturally," Bextara said, sarcasm dripping from her voice, "they want me to work a miracle and convince 2 species that have spent half a century trying to exterminate each other to start sharing recipes and comparing vacation photos." "That's the spirit," Blocknath said, completely missing the sarcasm. "But you won't be going alone. We got you the best bodyguard in the galaxy." Bextara perked up a little. "A Coranian battle monk, one of those cybernetic warriors from the Nexus." "Even better," Blocknath said, checking his data pad. "We got you a human." The silence that followed was so profound you could have heard a pin drop in the void of space. Then, as if someone had opened a floodgate, the chamber erupted in panic. "A human," shrieked Counselor Pipera, her tentacles writhing in horror. "They've gone berserk. They're from a world of death," someone whispered in the background. "They eat poison for fun," another voice added. "I heard they throw themselves off cliffs, just for fun," a third person said. Bextara looked at the council president, his diplomatic training battling his survival instincts. "You want me to negotiate the most important peace treaty in galactic history, while being protected by a creature from a planet where literally everything is trying to kill each other." "His name is Jake Murphy," Blocksnath said proudly. "He has excellent references and charges very reasonable rates." "And what are they?" Bextara asked, dreading the answer. "Are they qualifications for this position?" Blocksnath consulted his notes. "Oh, it says here that he was a kindergarten teacher." The room fell silent again, this time with the kind of silence that occurs when a group of beings simultaneously wonder if they heard correctly. "A what?" Bextara finally managed to say, "a kindergarten teacher. Apparently, that's someone who manages small groups of humans." Bextara nodded as a migraine formed in each of his 4 eye stems. "They hired someone who looks after human infants to protect me during peace negotiations that could decide the fate of 2 civilizations." "Exactly." Blocknath seemed delighted that I understood. "If he can handle human children, he can handle anything. He'll be waiting for you in the antechamber. The diplomatic shuttle leaves in 1 hour." What no one knew then was that exactly 14 hours later, that human kindergarten teacher would accomplish what 47 years of galactic diplomacy had failed to do, and he'd do it in a mere 3 minutes. Now, if you've never met a human, let me paint you a picture. Their average height for a galactic citizen, which means they're tall enough to be intimidating, but not so tall that you have to duck through doorways. They have these weird, flexible faces that change shape to express emotions, which is downright terrifying if you're not used to it. And they have these things called teeth that they use to grind food, but they seem capable of biting through titanium. Jake Morphy sat in the council waiting room, calmly eating what appeared to be a sandwich. But it wasn't just any sandwich, it was a human sandwich, meaning it contained enough capsa and china to kill a small regalian, enough processed meat to poison a vegan diplomat, and enough complex carbohydrates to put a Catunian in a coma. Ambassador Bextara, Jake said, standing and extending his hand in what humans call a handshake. Bextara eyed the limb as if it were a live grenade. I'm Jake Murphy. I'll be your bodyguard for this mission. Bextara's diplomatic training kicked in just now. Yeah, well, I'm sure you're very qualified for the position. Thanks, Jake replied, taking another bite of his sandwich. I must say, I'm pretty excited about this job. I've never been involved in a peace negotiation. It sounds a lot more interesting than my previous job. What was your previous job? Bextara asked, though he instantly regretted it. Oh, I was a kindergarten teacher. The silence dragged on. Finally, Bextara managed to say, you taught human infants. Yes, 5-year-olds, cool, but boy, do they have energy. Always running around, climbing on everything, putting random things in their mouths. You have to keep an eye on them all the time. Bextara's mind was racing. This creature had been responsible for controlling several young humans at the same time, the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and he'd been in charge of their offspring. The job posting mentioned that they needed someone who could handle high-stress situations and wasn't afraid of conflict, Jake continued cheerfully. After dealing with 25 kids arguing over who gets the red crayon. I think I can handle a couple of alien diplomats, you know. Bextara said cautiously, you're considered the most dangerous creature in known space. Jake stopped mid-chew. Seriously, that's weird. I'm pretty harmless, I don't even eat meat on Mondays. You come from Earth, Bextara insisted, a Class 12 death world. Your planet is so dangerous that the Galactic Tourism Bureau requires a 17-page waiver just to visit your moon. Oh, Jake said dismissively. Yeah, Earth's kind of rough, but you get used to it. I mean, sure, there are some poisonous plants and some biting animals, but it's not that bad. Last week I went hiking in the mountains and only ran into 2 bears. 2 bears. Yeah. A female bear with her cub, super cute. I kept my distance. Of course, you wouldn't want to get between a mother and her baby. Bextara realized he was hyperventilating. This human had just casually crossed paths with 2 of Earth's deadliest predators and described them as cute. Anyway, Jake said, finishing his sandwich. When do we leave? I packed light, just the essentials. He pointed to what looked like a small backpack. Is that all you brought? Bextara asked. Sure, I've got a change of clothes, some snacks, a first aid kit, and a few books. Oh, and my lucky multi-tool. You never know when you're going to need to fix something. He pulled out what looked like a small device that unfolded into at least 12 different tools, each of which could be used as a weapon in the right hands, which just happened to be human hands. Okay, Bextara said weakly. I guess we should go. The diplomatic transport is already waiting. Great, Jake replied, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. I've never been on a spaceship. This is going to be fun. As they walked toward the docking bay, Bextara couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to embark on the most dangerous diplomatic mission in galactic history. And somehow, the most terrifying thing of all was that his bodyguard thought it was going to be fun. The diplomatic transport ship Peaceful Endeavor was a marvel of galactic engineering, designed specifically to carry important dignitaries safely through hostile zones. It boasted triple redundant life support systems, military-grade shields, and enough firepower to deter even the most determined pirates. What it didn't have was a human-compatible food synthesizer. So, Jake said, settling into his seat as he surveyed the luxurious cabin, "This is pretty nice, very spacious on Earth. The longest flight I ever did was like 12 hours, and they packed us in like sardines." Captain Grixel, an Alterian veteran who had been piloting diplomatic missions for 2 decades, nearly choked. With their nutrient paste. Sardines. Oh, they're little fish. We pack them tightly in cans. They're great with crackers. Jake pulled what looked like a small metal cylinder out of his backpack. "Want to try some? I brought extras." The entire bridge crew took a step back in unison. Bextara quickly intervened. "That's very kind of you, Jake, but I don't think our digestive systems are compatible with Earth food." "No problem," said Jake, opening the can with a contraption that looked suspiciously like a miniature sword. More to me, the smell that came out of the can was indescribable, but it was enough to send the ship's air filtration system into emergency mode. Jake, meanwhile, happily ate what looked like rotten fish, enjoying every bite. Then Jake said between bites, "Tell me about these people we're going to meet, the Ephrians and the Crystalline. What's their deal?" Bextara launched into a detailed explanation of the conflict, the territorial disputes, the resource wars, the cultural misunderstandings that had escalated to genocide. Jake listened intently, nodding occasionally, or asking clarifying questions. "Wow," he said when she finished. 47 years fighting over mining rights and hurt feelings. That's rough. You know, we had something similar back on Earth. Well, several times actually, but there was one more that lasted 100 years. 100 years, squealed Navigator Pipkes. Yeah, the 100 Years' War. France and England fought over who should be king of France. It took them a century to realize that maybe the French should decide for themselves. And how did it end? Bextara asked. In spite of herself. Oh, they got tired of fighting and signed a treaty. Then they started fighting with other people. Humans are weird like that. We have trouble staying still for very long. The crew exchanged glances. Terrified. This creature was describing century-long wars as if they were mere inconveniences. But hey, Jake continued, at least we almost always make up afterward. For example, my great-grandfather fought in World War II, and now I have German and Japanese friends. We're pretty good at forgetting old grudges when there's food involved. World War II. Captain Grixel asked weakly. Oh, that was a big global conflict. It lasted about 6 years. Basically, everyone was involved. It was an ugly thing, but we sorted it out in the end. Jake pulled out a small device that looked like a communicator. Do you want to see pictures from my vacation in Japan last year? Beautiful country, amazing food. It's hard to believe that 80 years ago we were trying to kill each other. The device displayed images of Jake next to various monuments, grinning with that terrifying human grin, completely oblivious to the fact that he was documenting his visit to a nation that had once been an enemy, as if it were the most natural thing in the universe. You know what's funny? Jake said as he scrolled through more pictures. I was talking to an elderly gentleman in Tokyo, and he told me about his grandfather, who fought in the war. I compared stories about my great-grandfather, and afterward, we went to eat sushi together. Good sushi, and very fresh fish. By this point, the crew was watching Jake with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. Here was a creature describing how his species had gone to global war and then made peace by eating raw fish with their former enemies. Jake said Bextara carefully. Why are you telling us all this? Oh, I just thought it might be useful for negotiations. I mean, if we humans could stop fighting and become friends, maybe these Cephrians and Crystallines can too. Sometimes people just need to sit down and share a good meal. Jake stood up and stretched, his joints cracking slightly, which startled the entire crew. Speaking of which, there's a gym on this ship. I've been sitting for like 3 hours, and I'm already getting restless. "There's an exercise room on deck 7, he said automatically. "Captain Grixel." "But it's not really designed for that," said Jake, already heading for the door. "I'm just going to burn off some energy. Nothing too intense, just some basic cardio." When he left, the bridge was silent except for the drone of the ship's engines. Finally, Communications Officer Kix broke the silence. "She said she was going to do some cardio for fun and wants to feed the enemy diplomats," added Navigator Pipkes. "Her species wages 100-year wars and then makes friends by eating raw fish," whispered Captain Grixel. Bextara slumped in her chair. "I'm starting to think this mission might actually work, and that scares me more than anything." 20 minutes later, Jake returned looking refreshed and full of energy. Behind him, the ship's maintenance team was desperately trying to figure out why the gym's reinforced exercise equipment was now bent into curious geometric shapes. "Nice workout," Jake said cheerfully. "This is going to be fun." The neutral station Harmony was a monument to galactic diplomacy, a massive space station located exactly the same distance between the Cephrean Empire and the Crystalline Confederacy. It had been built specifically for peace negotiations, with every detail carefully designed to not favor either side. The meeting room was a perfect circle with identical chairs, identical lighting, and identical temperature controls for each delegation. What it didn't have was a protocol for dealing with humans. "Remember," Bextara whispered to Jake as they approached the conference room. "Just stay quiet in the corner and try, not to exist too obviously." "Understood," Jake whispered back. "I'll be invisible like a ninja." The fact that Jake knew what a ninja was only made Bextara more nervous. The doors opened with a soft hiss, revealing a scene that would have been impressive if it weren't so terrifying. At one side of the circular table sat General Crixton of the Cephrean Empire, a reptilian creature over 2 meters tall, her scales forged in the fire of 1,000 battles. Her combat armor was riddled with scars and dents, each mark a testament to her survival in conflicts that had ravaged entire planets. Her eyes glowed with the icy fire of someone who had spent 47 years perfecting the art of war. Beside her, 2 junior officers stood stiff with tension. One bore the distinctive red markings of a tactical advisor, while the other had a blue-green sheen on his scales, the mark of a communications specialist. Both looked as if they would rather be anywhere else in the galaxy. Before them stood Melody, the Hive Queen of the Crystalline Confederation, a living crystal being whose body refracted light into lethal rainbow patterns. Her voice, when she spoke, harmonized with itself at frequencies capable of shattering glass at close range. She was accompanied by her drone escorts, each a smaller version of herself, with crystalline bodies that they vibrated with barely contained energy. Behind her floated 3 prismatic data nodes, crystalline repositories containing the Confederation's collective grievances, meticulously documented over nearly 5 decades of conflict. The nodes pulsed with light in time with the Queen's breathing. The air between the 2 delegations seemed to spark with potential energy. The station's environmental systems worked at full capacity, struggling to maintain a neutral atmosphere as the Cephrean delegation emanated waves of heat and the crystalline delegation radiated a bone-chilling cold. "Ambassador Bexter," General Crixton's voice boomed like distant thunder. "I trust you understand this is merely a formality. The Empire has no intention of negotiating with crystalline parasites." "Parasites." Queen Melodia's melodious voice rose to a pitch that rattled the windows of the room. "Your kind wouldn't know what symbiosis is, even if it bit their scaly backside, which, by the way, is exactly what we think." The drones around him flickered red for an instant, their crystalline structures aggressively reconfiguring themselves. The station's security systems registered the change, illuminating warning indicators throughout the room, which everyone carefully ignored. "Excellent," Bextara muttered under his breath. "We're off to a great start." He cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we could begin with a review of the territorial boundaries established in the proximate agreements." His tablet projected a 3-dimensional map of the disputed sector, highlighting the conflicting boundaries with a flashing yellow light. 17 planetary systems were at stake. Their populations held their breath as this final negotiation unfolded. "The proximate agreements are null and void," declared General Crixton, slamming his claw on the table so hard that the holographic planets scattered for a moment like startled birds. "They were signed under duress. While my predecessor suffered from Regalian flu, one of his officers shuddered almost imperceptibly at the blast. A reaction that did not go unnoticed by the crystalline delegates, whose drones shifted slightly, recording the moment for later analysis. His predecessor accepted those limits because he was caught trying to steal our nesting crystals, Queen Melodia retorted, her drone escorts vibrating in furious harmony. All he suffered from was chronic stupidity. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees as she spoke, ice crystals beginning to form on the edges of the negotiating table. The Cephrian delegation responded unconsciously, their scales warming to compensate, causing distortion waves in the air around them. Enough. General Crixton stood up, his massive figure casting a shadow across the table. "I'm done with this charade. The Empire will resume our planetary bombardment in 6 hours. This time, we will not stop until the last crystal is space dust." The communications officer's eyes widened in alarm. This deviation from the diplomatic script would now trigger emergency contingency protocols across the entire Cephrian fleet. 17 battle groups would begin moving in attack formation, preparing planet-shattering weapons that hadn't been used in 1,000 years. Forward. Scale brain. The Melody Queen's form began to glow with a dangerous light. Its crystalline structure reconfigured itself to channel more energy. "We've developed new resonance weapons that will turn your ships into abstract art. Very abstract, very exploited." His statement wasn't just an empty threat. The latest crystalline resonance cannons could sever molecular bonds at a distance of 50,000 kilometers, literally disintegrating enemy ships from within. The development of this technology had been highly classified, but the Confederation was ready to deploy it if negotiations failed. Baxter watched as 47 years of diplomatic progress evaporated in 5 minutes. This was going exactly as badly as he'd imagined, which meant it was worse than he'd expected, but still not as catastrophic as he'd feared. For now, he glanced at the timer embedded in his data tablet. Galactic media networks were already broadcasting countdowns to the deadline. Billions of citizens across 17 star systems were following the negotiations in real time, many already evacuated to safer areas, though nowhere would truly be safe if the planet-shattering weapons were activated. "Perhaps," she said desperately, "we could discuss mining rights separately from the territorial disputes." Her last resort proposal projected new border lines with jointly managed special zones highlighted in green. It was a compromise that would have been revolutionary a decade ago, but now seemed pathetically inadequate given the current level of hostility. "Mining rights are non-negotiable," General Crixton snarled. "Those asteroids have been in Imperial space for 3 generations." His tactical officer subtly adjusted her stance with small movements of her fingers that Bextara recognized as Kfrian military sign language. "Fleet deployment already initiated." The officer's scales had paled slightly. She knew what was coming. "You're in Imperial space because you moved the border beacons," Queen Melodia replied. "We have holographic evidence of your ships literally dragging the navigation beacons to new positions." One of her data nodes floated forward, projecting an image of Cephrian warships repositioning territorial markers. The timestamp indicated it had occurred 47 years ago, but the evidence was still damning. It was a military exercise. A military exercise that just happened to have transferred deposits of rare minerals worth 47 billion credits to your territory. The drone escorts were now vibrating at a tooth-churning frequency. The station's security protocols automatically dimmed the lights and reinforced the room's structural integrity fields, anticipating potential violence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Bextara said, raising her voice. "Perhaps we could take a brief break and call it a day," Crixton interrupted. "The Empire has wasted enough time on this charade." Her officers were already gathering their equipment, and one of them discreetly activated a subspace communicator to alert the Imperial fleet. Emergency code patterns began flashing on their screen. Full clearance for combat deployment. For once, I agree with the lizard, Queen Melodia said as her crystalline form began to transform into something suspiciously resembling a combat configuration. The Confederacy has more useful things to do than listen to her delusions of competence. Jake, who had been standing silently in the corner as instructed, chose that moment to raise his hand as if he were in class. "Excuse me, sorry to interrupt. Does anyone know if there's a coffee maker around here? This is all fascinating, but it's making me a little sleepy, and I don't want to miss anything important." The room fell silent. Not the comfortable silence of those who are reflecting, but that absolute silence that occurs when everyone's brain has just encountered something so unexpected that it needs to reboot. The Defiant officers froze mid-motion. Their defensive stances were half-formed. The drone escort stopped vibrating. Their crystalline structures froze as if someone had pressed pause. General Crixton's gleaming eyes fixed on Jake. What did he say slowly? His tactical officer's hand instinctively slid toward her weapon, the thermal signatures around her scales rising as a threat signal. Queen Melodia's voice dropped to a whisper. "That's a human." The data nodes around them suddenly focused their attention on Jake, scanning him with access points that collected biometric data at full speed. Emergency classification protocols activated throughout the crystalline intelligence network. Silence dragged on. Jake looked around, clearly confused by this sudden attention. "Hi, I'm Jake. I'm just here to make sure no one tries to harm Ambassador Bextara during the negotiations. Not that I expect any trouble or anything. Everyone seems like a reasonable person." "Well, sort of. You know what I mean." General Crixton's clawed hand instinctively moved toward his weapon. "There's a human in the room." His officers had already taken 3 steps back, putting as much distance between them as possible, and Jake, the communications specialist, was frantically sending an emergency update to Imperial Command. "Human presence confirmed. Advise immediate action." "I see that," replied Hive Queen Melodia, as her drone escorts shifted into defensive positions, forming a crystalline barrier between her and the unexpected threat. "The question is, what do we do about it?" Ancient protocols were activated throughout the Crystalline Confederation's vast intelligence network. The last documented encounter with a human had resulted in the loss of 3 Hive ships and a mining colony. The incident had been classified at the highest security level. "Do about what?" Jake asked, still wearing that unsettlingly human smile. "I'm just here as an observer. Think of me as a friendly fly on the wall. A friendly fly eagerly waiting for someone to tell it where to get some caffeine." His relaxed posture and calm demeanor only heightened the tension. Both delegations recognized the classic predator tactic, appear harmless until the moment of attack. "Ambassador Bextara," General Crixton said, without taking his eyes off Jake, "why did you bring a predator from a world of death to a peace negotiation?" Her voice had taken on a new nuance. The careful, controlled tone of someone trying not to provoke an alpha predator. Her officers had positioned themselves for the best possible defensive cover, though they both knew it would be useless if the human decided to attack. "He's my bodyguard," Bextara replied weakly. "Your bodyguard," the Melody Queen repeated. "You brought a human as a bodyguard to protect yourself from us." The drone escorts began emitting a high-frequency alert tone, audible only to crystalline entities. Across the Confederation, defense systems were ramping up to maximum readiness. "Well, put that way it sounds a little insulting," Jake said, "but I'm sure everyone's perfectly safe. I mean, this is a peace negotiation, isn't it? What's the worst that could happen?" Her question hung in the air like a live grenade. Both delegations had extensive historical records documenting exactly what could happen when humans engaged in interspecies conflict. Casualty figures were astronomical. The silence returned, even deeper than before. Both delegations stared at Jake with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters or particularly spectacular explosions. "Very well," General Crixton finally said. "Change of plans. This negotiation is postponed indefinitely. His tactical officer was already at the door with the security override codes ready to expedite his departure. Emergency evacuation procedures had been activated throughout the Kfrians section of the station. Okay, Hive Queen Melodia said immediately. The Confederacy needs to consult with our military advisors. Their data nodes had already been reabsorbed into their crystalline structure, protecting the valuable intelligence they contained throughout the crystalline space. The War Council members were being roused from their lethargy. About what? Jake asked. About me. Both leaders answered in unison. About you. Me. But I'm only here for the coffee and the fascinating political conversation. I'm not even supposed to participate. I'm more of an, what's the word?